And when watching this film, there just seems to be so much from so many of your other films. It brings up, evokes so many of your other films.
Oh, yeah?
Either directly or indirectly. I'm just wondering if, you're probably the worst person to ask this question, but if you could talk about how this, the importance of this film to you in terms of your whole entire work.
It was by far the most ambitious thing I've ever done. And I don't think I ever want to do anything like it again. Have you ever sat through a longer film? It was an epic enterprise. And we lost a lot of people in the course of the shoot. Because they were just falling like flies at some point because it was too exhausting. We had a traveling group of 25 who did the entire film. And
are you talking about actors or crew now?
No, crew. The actors all survived. Actually, in the entire shoot, not a single person got hurt or anything happened, which was totally mysterious because, like in Australia, we were completely wasted. I mean, we arrived there like dead, and we were joined then by a crew of 100 in Australia, and they really literally had to carry us to the set. We couldn't do it anymore. But nothing ever happened. We were driving 2 hours in the morning to the set and 2 hours back every night. On dust roads in the desert, and nothing ever happened. It was really fantastic. But I wouldn't risk that again. I mean, to go over every limit. Too old for it.
Tell us a bit about the film's interest in technology. I mean, in some ways, this is such a intimate story, so much a story about love, about the relationship. But there's this whole layer of technology that's really fascinating to look at now, and it must have changed. We're surrounded by this kind of technology now, but we weren't so much at that time.
When I wanted to make a film about a man who would make a blind person see, it was clear that it would be a science fiction film. It had to. And my interest in science fiction, I realized, was really very much in what would happen to what was going to be the future of our audiovisual culture. Because it seemed to me in 1990 and already through the 80s that things were happening very quickly and enormous changes were happening. And that was my main interest in the future. And that's why I came up with this metaphor for, well, the image industry, which was to be able to see your own dreams.
What's sort of poignant in a way about seeing that today is that it seems like so much of the imagery that's around us and that these machines are creating doesn't come from within us, but it's sort of imposed on us, that we're fed all these images from the outside, sort of corporate-made images. So the idea of using this technology to start from the inside seems like not the direction that it's gone.
Well, you never know. Sometimes you think that those kids who work, who play their Nintendos and their game machines for hours and hours, that it is sort of inside too. You see them and they're surrounded by God knows what, and they just don't pay attention to anything. Sometimes I think all these games are also projections inside.
I want to give the audience a chance to jump in.
No space away.
Okay, back there.
I had a question about the footage involving the Aborigines. I understand from my travels in Australia that they tend to be very closed in. And I was wondering how you went about the process of developing a relationship with the Aborigines that you work with, and able to simulate a lot of the customs, the mourning rituals, and so forth.
It wasn't easy. We worked on the land of the Bantua, as it was said on the film, and the community that lived there was called, the place was called Utopia. It's like 150 kilometers east of Alice Springs. And we definitely needed their approval that we could shoot there because it was their land. And we needed their collaboration, which was tricky because they have no concept of fiction in their culture. And they had never been in touch with movies. So we had to sit down a long time to sort of until we got across what we wanted to do. Biggest problem being that it was not only fiction, which was difficult enough, but the future. And that, finally, I don't think we ever got across. And they had a basic understanding of what we wanted to do. I remember we had a very crucial meeting. We were sitting on the ground with all the elders, and it was like, we have the production manager, our Aboriginal connection, who spoke their language, my assistant, and Thierry, my French production designer, who had been on the trip with me. And we had been speaking for hours with them, and the whole discussion had come to sort of a grinding halt. And nobody said anything anymore, and we weren't sure if we would resolve that thing. When Thierry, my French designer, sort of, he didn't understand much of the English in the first place, and he hadn't really followed the discussion. So just because everybody was so silent, he asked the eldest next to him, "So what are you guys eating here?" Which is a very French question. And he told him about the snakes and all sorts of insects and grasshoppers and stuff. And he asked Thierry, "So what do you guys eat?" And Thierry said, "Well, where I come from, we eat snails and frogs." And the chief's eyes were lighting up. Finally, he had somebody to talk to. And actually, I don't think we could have shot there if Thierry, our French guy, hadn't brought up escargots and frog legs. Because that really broke the ice. That was food they knew. But they were very serious about their ceremonies, for instance. The woman's ceremony, the burial, could not be shot by any man. I mean, the ceremony, only women could attend. Also, the camera had to be operated by girls, all the men. Our female crew had to step in. Robbie couldn't shoot it. All the men had to be far away. And they would only do it once. And this is where their lack of imagination of fiction really kicked in. It was inconceivable for them that I would have said, "Cut, let's do this again." They did it once. And they really cried and were very, very emotional. I still haven't seen the film because I didn't want to show the abbreviated version for them. And only now that I have a print, I still have to go and show it to them. But the problem now is that some of these elders have died and they cannot really watch the film anymore because they have not a right to see the person who died. That's another problem.
Yeah, here?
Two small things. One, is there any material in the Reader's Digest condensed version that is not included in this film? And the other thing, is this going to be available at all in any kind of like DVD release, something or other?
In the short version, there is not a frame that is not in here. It's only additional material. And the film will be released on DVD in Europe by the end of the year and hopefully in America early next year. Over there.
Obviously, you've been looking and influenced by the Aborigine Dreamtime in your exploration. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, have you heard anything about the concept of master of dreams?
Not really. I mean, the elders, each of them was a carrier of a certain dream story, which was related to a landscape and a stretch of land, just as well as the paintings were maps and related to a stretch of land. And these stories, which is really their religion, these stories, about the land, and the land is, if you want, their only God. There is no gods. They have mythical, ancient figures that are represented by the landscape. And the elders, they are the owners and the carriers of these stories. And eventually, when they know they're going to die, when they're too old, they have to pass their story on to somebody who then becomes the carrier of that piece of land and that story. And they're really responsible, and it keeps the land alive, and the land keeps them alive. And a lot of their stories help them to find water holes and food, and they can walk for enormous distances and always know where the water is because of the stories.
Okay, back there.
I was wondering about comrades, how they talk in the movie, and I was wondering about is your part confidence that you use for confidence?
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear that.
You know how when I was watching the movie, I started thinking about Conrad and his idea of the black
Oh,
confidence.
Conrad. Okay.
And I was wondering if your part confidence is to use something and part of your own.
It'd be far-fetched because I'm not so familiar with Conrad. It'd be too far-fetched to say yes.
Right here? Go ahead. In the beginning was the word.
It was a preoccupation of mine. In a way, it still is, yeah. And I still think that the image culture is getting pretty much out of control, and that images need protection, and that stories and the words and music are great protection. I'm happy to say that one of my favorite musicians, and he contributed a great song to the score, Lou Reed, is here. Lou, are you still there? Are you? Did it go? And one of our actors is here, Tom Farrell, the mysterious. Tom, can you get up for a second? Tom was in Lightning Over Water in Paris, Texas. And I cut him out of Far Away So Close, but he survived in the long version of The End of the World.
You were talking about words, and it's the voiceover narration is very beautifully handled and beautifully written. I'm just wondering if you could talk about when that was done, how, what the process was in terms of that.
That voiceover was part of the original script by Peter Carey. And when we had to cut the film down, the figure of the narrator had to bite the dust. And Sam Neill became a side character and couldn't be the narrator anymore, which was a pity. And I mean,